show today, you'll meet a fellow entrepreneur who helps people be better entrepreneurs. Let me explain. David is a consultant in the merger and acquisition space, meaning he helps people buy and sell businesses well. He's an expert guide to setting up your business to sell for the highest value possible, if you're in the market for that. And if you're still building your empire, he'll guide you through buying a business that will continue to make you money for the long term. David has seen and knows how to navigate all of the red flags in these types of transactions across industries. As you listen to this episode, I hope your wheels are turning. Could you or should you buy a business? Are you taking the right steps to ensure you can sell your business one day? And of course, what can you learn from David's content creation strategy and journey that will also help your business grow? David, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
I've been looking forward to this ever since we ran into each other in person and we got to meet back in October. I'm excited about this as well, and to meet your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so fun when we run into someone that we've heard on another show. You were actually on one of my clients' shows, and I found that episode super interesting. So this is just perfect. I want to start out by hearing your definition of abundance and what that looks like for you today.
Yeah, my definition of abundance is that when life throws us little curveballs or problems or things that we have to deal with, our problem isn't trying to come up with a solution, but rather choosing amongst the different solutions we have access to. And this happened the other day where something came up and I needed to pay a rather large bill. And my problem wasn't having the money. My problem was, am I going to take it from the savings account, or am I going to take it, just put it on my line of credit because it's only going to be on there for a few weeks? Like it was deciding what way I was going to pay it rather than how on earth do I pay it.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's abundance, is having resiliency and redundancy in your life. So you've got resources to deal with the things that come at you, both, sort of in the, resource of money kind of way that we often think about this, but also with respect to things like time and just, capital we've established in relationships. I've got really great relationships with family members. And, if one of the solutions to the problem is to reach out and ask for help from someone to see if they could, give one of my children a drive somewhere or something like that, then I know that those are things I can call on too. So it's not just money, it's also about those relationships and the way that we choose to live so that people want to be helpful to us.
I love that. It's a really round definition because it really includes relationships, money. I like how you said redundancy in our lives, because I feel like often we're trying to get rid of any kind of redundancy. Like if we have clutter or if we have too many meetings, or, we just feel like, okay, get all of this stuff off my plate. But you've kind of flipped that and said redundancy equals options for solutions in a way. So I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and that kind of leads us into, you said about being helpful, and you are very helpful to business owners. I'm going to just open the floor to you and let you share the many ways that you help small businesses. And I think you're even more like small and medium size. But yeah, just share about that, please.
Sure. So kind of mid-career, I left a career in advertising and became a finance broker. After starting and then selling a small business of my own, I became a finance broker. So I was working with small businesses, helping them to obtain financing for growth, expansion, buying new equipment, and I was brokering loans from finance companies, leasing companies, banks, that kind of thing. And I started to meet people who were looking for money to buy businesses, complete businesses that were already operating. It kind of opened my eyes to the world of buying and selling businesses. And then we hit that big financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And a lot of the companies I was using as sources of capital for my clients, they went under, like they just collapsed in that crisis on Wall Street. And so I decided to get into business brokerage because I saw that there was a real need. I saw deals being done with intermediaries who didn't really know what they were doing, and people's money and time being jeopardized by this lack of knowledge and experience. And I knew that I didn't know everything, but I knew that I could spot that there was a problem. And so I joined up with a big international franchise brand of business brokers, and they gave me access to training. So over a 3.5 year period, I was a business broker, worked under someone else initially to kind of learn the ropes, went through a training and certification program. And in that 3.5 year period, I was able to successfully list and sell over 35 companies for other people. And it may sound like selling 35 companies over 3.5 years is a nice, eddy, steady kind of business. But in fact, it was not. It was terrifying because in each of those 3 years, I had tremendous growth. But in each of those 3 years, I had periods of 7 to 9 months long with no deals closing and a lot of regular monthly overhead expenses for my office. And so it was just this roller coaster cash flow. I just got a haircut, so you can't see, but there's like gray hair on the side of my head. And I always say that all the gray hair came in at that point in my life because I was just under an incredible amount of stress. And I had two very young children at the time. So eventually I just said, I can't do this. And I decided to get out. I handed I could say I sold the office, but if I said I sold the office, it's because I'm trying to save face and make it sound more important than it was. What I did is I signed a deal with one of my associates. He took over the office, and the compensation he paid me was that he was going to give me a cut of every file that I had opened during my tenure as owner. And over the next 2 years, I got some checks. Like he was able to close some of those deals, and I was able to get some kind of compensation from those deals I had started. So that was fantastic. But I had gone and became a banker, and I was working with the bank. And while I was working with the bank, my phone kept ringing, and people would call me up and say, "Hey, I was given your name by someone who you helped before, and I'm looking to buy a business, or I'm trying to, sell my business." And I get advice from my accountant and my lawyer, but they're just trying to tell me, what's best for my deal. They can't seem to help me negotiate or navigate with the other party. And I would say to these people initially, like, "Hey, sorry, I don't do that anymore." Until one day, this guy named Bob called me, who had been someone I got to know pretty well as a buyer in my brokerage office. And he said, "Dave, I want to do this deal, but I'm worried that there's certain red flags, and I want to sit down with you and go through it." And I said, "Bob, I've got this full-time job. I don't do brokerage anymore. If I'm going to do something with you, I'd have to charge you like a consultant, and I'd have to meet you after hours." And he said, "Great. What's your address? I'll come to your house Saturday morning." And so he came over to my house Saturday morning. We sat down at the kitchen table, like lots of paper in those days, and we went through it and created a whole list of things that I advised him to take a further look at and check out and stuff like this. And he ended up paying me a couple $100. And that became the beginning of a little side hustle in consulting. And it was during that time I realized, hey, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something I could develop here. And eventually the bank chose to reorganize, and they wanted to cut the number of people in my position. And so I kind of made it known that I'd be open to one of these packages. And the bank gave me a continuance package. So they gave me a salary basically for 4 months with benefits while I went looking for another job. But instead, I threw myself full throttle into building my own consulting business. And in that time, I set up some websites, I wrote a couple of books, and I really put a renewed effort into my online presence with YouTube in particular. And that's how I started to meet people. Initially I wasn't getting anything from people online. It was a direct LinkedIn approach that I was using. I was using my established network of people that I had in LinkedIn here in the region, and I was reaching out to people and just letting them know that I was now acting as a consultant, doing a lot of the things I used to do as a business broker with a different business model. And I often say that I do a lot of brokerage services, but I use the business model of accountants and attorneys. So I'll basically charge people for the time I put into a file, and I've got a menu of fixed price services that I do for people, both buyers and sellers, to help them navigate these deals. And what the great thing about that is I don't have an interest in the outcome of the deal. And so I'm just focused on what's in front of me, what I'm looking at, the problem the client has, and giving them advice about those things. So for a buyer, for instance, if I show them that a deal is bad, there's no reason for me to try to convince them to do the deal anyway, like there was when I was a broker, because business brokers get paid when a business is sold. And so I often draw the analogy to car dealers, right? Like if you go to a car dealership and you say, I'm having trouble getting around town, they're not going to tell you to buy a bus pass. like they're going to try whatever they can to get you into something that they've got there for sale, but they're not going to suggest a bus pass.
Right.
And so that's sort of the conflict that I now avoid in this consulting kind of setup. And over the course of time, as I created more and more content online, it started to work for me. And maybe this is, sort of part of what you want to get into, but initially the reason I was creating videos on YouTube was because every time I met or had a phone call with someone, they were asking me the exact same questions. And so what I started to do is I started to create sort of a catalog or a repertoire of videos, each one just answering one question. And so when people would reach out to me saying, "Hey, I'd like to meet for coffee, to discuss my situation," I would say, "Well, can you give me a couple of ideas of what you're trying to do, and then we can meet." And they would give me a little bit of feedback on what their goal was, and then I would say, "Well, great, let's meet next week. But here, before we do, can you watch these 3 videos?" And an amazing thing started to happen, Virginia, is half the time people would then say, "Oh, well, I don't really think we do need to meet." And then they would just say, "Let's have a phone call because I'd like to start working with you." And so what I realized I was doing is I was automating part of the process of rapport building and educating people as to what I could deliver. And so it really served to streamline things and make it easier for me. And over the course of time, those videos went from being something I referred people to. Like I honestly chose YouTube initially just because it was a free place I could host videos.
Right.
Right. And each one would have a unique URL, and I just kind of kept them in a notepad on my desktop where I could copy and paste them into emails and stuff.
Yeah.
But eventually what was happening is those videos could be seen by anyone in the world. And so then I started to get these inquiries from people that lived far away from me. And it changed the way I was doing business. And I thought, if I'm having phone calls and consulting with someone who's, 5 miles away, I can certainly have phone calls and consult with someone who's 200 miles away.
Right.
And so it just kind of changed my business. And so I went from entirely working with people that were sort of regional to me to today, almost everyone we work with is far away. And we've grown to a team of people now and everything.
Yeah. Oh, man. That is amazing. I'm so excited to hear that. You talked and touched on so many topics. Often when someone comes to me about creating a show, some of the initial things are, okay, well, what should my first episode be about? And what should my first 10 episodes be about? And you very clearly shared your example of, hey, answer your top FAQs one at a time using your content. So you have to stop repeating yourself and, going through those redundant conversations. But, you're creating this library of resources for people so that when they really do come to you with more questions, they are very specific and hopefully unique about their situation instead of just the general, probably things you could Google, but at least you are providing the answers and they know and trust you. So yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's talk a little more deeply about how exactly you're helping small business owners. I see I think that's your book cover poster, one of them, because you have
It's one of them, yeah.
8, 9 books out now.
Yeah, the new one that just came out is my 9th title.
Yeah.
And the first ones came out like almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And books are interesting because when I wrote my first book, I had this idea in my head that a book needed to be like 150 pages. And the reality is that it does not. What people are really looking for today is they're looking for, let's put it this way, there's a certain segment of the population when they want to learn something, they go looking for a book because when they were growing up, they learned from books, right? And so what they're looking for is a succinct book that's going to answer their question and not be full of fluff. We've all read books that have a couple of great ideas and then they're filled with fluff so that they're thick enough to have the name of the book on the spine, right? And so the first book I wrote was about local investing and it was 150 pages long. And then the next book I wrote was about franchises, sharing some of the experiences of my clients in getting into franchise arrangements. And it was just over 100 pages long. And then my books just started to get more and more succinct and more narrow. So, for example, the new book is 118 pages long in print, but 50 of those pages in the back is more about my products and services and stuff like that. And the reviews that people leave for it are, this is directly to the point. There's no fluff. It's easy to learn from this, etc. And I look at creating a book as a top of funnel activity for my marketing, just like creating YouTube videos. And, I take my YouTube video audio and I release it on a podcast service as well, so that I'm getting both sides. So there are people, for example, who've been following me for years that know that I'm available in both formats. And so sometimes I might have an interview on my channel. This is like 45 minutes long. There's really no reason to sit in front of a screen and watch two, talking heads if you are really just listening. And so for some of these episodes I'll have, the viewership on YouTube will be low, but twice as many people will download it on the podcast feed. And I know it's the same audience consuming the material in different ways, depending on what it is I've put out and, what their position is. Like, are they busy driving somewhere? Are they at home? And even a lot of YouTube videos, I think, are kind of set in the background these days where they'll put it on and listen to it while they're maybe doing something in the kitchen.
Exactly. I was going to say it totally. And I think user behavior is so interesting because how they're consuming it depends on so many factors, whether they're on Wi-Fi or not, whether they're driving or not. Sure, I could listen to something as I'm cooking, but I kind of want to see the people. And so I'll just like have the tablet on YouTube and just be really truly listening to a podcast, but I'll glance up once in a while and see the two faces like, oh yeah, okay. It's like you start to develop this relationship with them in your own brain, of course. But what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say like how this ties into how I help business owners. For business owners, we primarily help owners who want to prepare their business for sale. We show them what it's worth through evaluation services. When they're ready to sell, we package it up, creating what's called the SIM or the business profile. This is a buyer-facing document that shows the business and why the asking price is justified. It gives that buyer all the potential information that they're going to need. And this is not the evaluation. So the evaluation is for the business owner to let them know what we think it will likely sell for after a negotiation. We recommend what we think is a reasonable asking price. We create the business profile that we can then put advertisements in a confidential fashion on the different business for sale websites, just like a business broker would. We manage those advertisements for people and we filter the inquiries. So when people send in an inquiry about the business, we can get back to them and get them to fill in a non-disclosure agreement. We also have a couple of neat little tools we have to sort out the truly interested from the tire kickers. And then we coach people through their conversations with the buyers and lead them up to the point where they have something on paper that they can then bring to their attorney for the final paperwork to put the deal together. So we kind of offer that in steps. So my goal with my online content and similarly with buyers, we also have a series of steps that we go through with buyers that are looking at acquiring a business. So what we do with our content online is we're always answering questions that are submitted by buyers or sellers about this process of doing the acquisition or operational stuff. Like, what's the best way to do this in your business? What should I be looking for once I take over a business to make it better? And so our listenership are people who want to get into business through buying a business, and it's also business owners. And they're listening to these comments and conversations, and they're learning, number one, for sellers, you're learning to be more empathetic with buyers. And this is key because I'll tell you something that is amazing to me. When people want to sell a business, something happens to make them different from when they're normally operating their business. So, Virginia, you run a service, you work with small business owners, and you help them with podcasting. And so, how much time do you spend thinking about what your customers might want from you?
All the time.
Right.
100%.
And when you are thinking about your pricing and what you're offering in your packages, you're trying to figure out what these prospective customers are going to find value in, right? Right. And most small business owners are just like that.
Yeah.
They spend a lot of time thinking about their customers, what their customers want, what their customers will find valuable. And here's what's amazing is when somebody decides to sell their business, they all of a sudden become entirely self-centered. They focus entirely on themselves and on the money they think they're going to get from the sale. And they start to daydream about their new RV or their condo down south or whatever it is. And they stop thinking about the customer. The minute you decide to sell your business, the business itself becomes a piece of inventory. And you have to make this attractive for somebody to want to pick it up off the shelf and buy it, right? And that means considering the point of view and the desires of the buyer. Why is the buyer going to want to buy my business? What is the buyer going to think of its value? I can tell you right now that the price of businesses is always driven by the cash flow. The more money your business makes, the more it's going to be worth. How long you've been in business doesn't matter. How cute your logo is doesn't matter, right? The renown or the fact that everybody knows you, again, doesn't matter unless those things together allow you to have a higher price, a bigger gross margin, and this leads to higher profits, right? Yeah. The trademark of Coca-Cola allows them to sell fizzy sugar water at double the price of the store brand.
Right.
That's a valuable trademark, right? Most small businesses don't have that kind of thing going on. And so when you are thinking about selling your business, you have to think about what's the buyer going to see as valuable. It's going to be your cash flow. The second biggest, most important thing is going to be that once the buyer looks at your business and says, yeah, I'd love to have this cash flow, they're then going to put a price on it based on the risk they see. And small businesses are very risky asset classes. So the way that we price them is typically through a multiple of cash flow. And for small businesses, this multiple is quite low compared to something like stock market investing, for example, because it's a very different kind of animal. In the stock market, you've got liquidity, meaning if you ever want to sell your shares, you just have to sell them on the market when it's open. And when you buy stock in, say, Coca-Cola, you get the whole leadership and management team and all their experience and their plans and all that kind of stuff. You just get that with your acquisition. When you're buying a small privately controlled business, almost always the leadership, vision, guidance, all that kind of stuff is with the owner. And when you buy the business, that person leaves.
Yeah.
And now the buyer has to, take on all of that responsibility. And so these are the factors that lead to small business values being lower. And so the value is one thing. The next thing that the buyer is going to ask themselves is, will the cash flow continue under my stewardship? And so now you get into things like, are there documented systems in place? Is the person does the person who owns this business, are they the chief salesperson? Are they talking to every prospective customer? What if people don't like me? What if the sales come from this person's unique social network or business network, right? And so then you're thinking about how risky is it going to look from the buyer's point of view based on what you're doing every day. And so a well-documented business that has all of its processes, procedures in place, that is big enough to have employees that deal with the customers. If you are a roofer and you're talking with the customers, organizing your employees, buying all the material and doing everything. Yeah, you may be able to sell your business, but chances are you're probably only going to be able to sell it to someone who's a roofer who's maybe younger than you. Whereas if it's a bigger outfit and you've got people in the office answering the phone, you've got salespeople talking to homeowners, you've got foremen who are organizing the job sites, you know, someone who's a purchaser who's getting the materials delivered. Somebody, you know, if all of that is organized and everyone knows their job, somebody can leave their job at the post office and come and own and run your business. And it makes it so that it's much more saleable because there's just so many more people out there who can take it over. And so this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about all the time on the channel. And I've got business owners who have been in the audience for years and they're working on their business. They're thinking about the ideas we share on the YouTube channel, implementing changes in their business to make their business better. And when it comes time to sell, you know, hopefully they'll reach out and work with me. And that's the whole point, is that we're creating this ongoing relationship where I'm creating value for them all the time and giving them a reason to keep me in their orbit, in their life. And when they need somebody, that you know, I'm going to be the person that they choose to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And that perfectly illustrates why I think every business owner should be creating video, audio, something, both online, just to start to build that relationship and do exactly what you've done and what you're doing. So thank you for illustrating that so clearly.
Do you ever work with small businesses, Virginia, that where the owner doesn't want to be the face, where they want to have some other person or
Yes.
character or something fill that role?
Yes. So it's really interesting because, of course, as the owner, you know, you're the marketing mind, you're the one with the vision, you're the one with the mission and the passion behind why you created the business. But so often, especially in the financial space, that person is genius at what they do, but not comfortable being on stage, being behind the camera, being behind the mic. You know, you just show them a picture of a microphone and they get like a, you know, hot flash of nervousness through their body. So that does happen often. And that's also part of the business journey, is deciding, okay, well, let me hire a marketing person in my business and have them do these different tasks to market us, but then also they're going to be the face and the voice of our podcast for the business under my direction. So that's definitely an option and something that we've done. But yeah, it's especially in these, what I generally call like a stiff profession. So financial services, medical professionals, various investors, and this attorneys fit in this bucket as well. Like I said, these people are genius at what they do. They can read a book all day. They can regurgitate law. They can, you know, do these amazing things, but scared to death to get on camera. so that works as well.
Well, there's all kinds of formats to what you can do, but I mean, if somebody really wants to build goodwill in the brand name of the business, I mean, you can really do that well by using some kind of spokesperson instead of the owner, because then you can always demonstrate to a buyer that, hey, I'm not the face of the business. You know, this other person is doing that, and they can continue to work for you. But you know, there's other formats like my Wednesday morning videos are solo casts. So it's just me looking into the camera, answering a question and talking. But then I also do interviews occasionally where I have someone come on and we do a live stream where I talk with a guest. But I've seen other people in different areas and some of the professions that you just mentioned where they'll have a show format where they have an interviewer. So, you know, it's more conversational. It's not, and I think this is where people get nervous, right? Because if you just stare into a camera and start talking, some people feel kind of weird about that. But if you are having a conversation like we are now with another person, it can be a lot more natural to just kind of talk, and that person who does the interview obviously can be, you know, more of a like a professional kind of moderator, spokesperson, actor, whatever kind of person. that can really help to smooth things for someone who's just starting off.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also kind of why I do what I do, is because, there's a certain amount of coaching that we can go through to make whoever it is be comfortable on camera, or get more comfortable on camera. And then the other piece is, the editing. I mean, okay, be weird, like, be your natural awkward self. And that's okay through a different lens, because you're always going to judge yourself so harshly. But through a different lens, my team and I can look at it and say, this isn't that bad. This isn't that awkward. Okay, we'll cut this and this, but this piece is true to your personality. So let's really keep that in. There's a certain amount of an art to it, in a way, to help that person out, even though they're so nervous on camera. But
now, everyone's going to wonder what weird stuff you just said that you edited out.
Yeah, I mean, there's everyone has their little idiosyncrasies, and some of it is just in salivary clicks and like mouth noises, and we remove all of that because I frankly don't want to hear that in my ear. And I'm actually like my own worst enemy there, because when I listen to my own audio, it's full of clicks and noises, and that's probably why I'm so attuned to it, because I had to edit my own stuff starting out and was like, this is terrible. I need help. So much like you kind of were pulled into your profession by someone insisting that you help them with this acquisition they were looking at, that's kind of the same as my story, where people said, oh no, you need to edit my show. We're doing this. We'll figure it out. It's okay. So I love that piece of your story. Can we get into, if someone listening is interested in buying a business, should they be looking at an industry or a type of business that they're already familiar with? Or is it okay to, buy a car wash or a coffee shop or some other business that you've never run before? What are the rules?
It's a great
there?
question, and a lot of people ask this question. So basically, here's what I'll say: is that the problem of small business human resources is what one of my clients terms as a bench depth problem. Okay, so what do they mean by that? Well, if you think about a small business, you might have a store manager and some employees, right? And in the very smallest of organizations, the store manager may be the owner, right? But let's say you're a little bit bigger, where you have a store manager who is not the owner and you own the store. Well, you know what? If that store manager falls ill, or that store manager quits because they fell in love and had to move across the country, or any number of things, who then fills in? There's only one person that can do that, and it's the owner, right? And so having a degree of familiarity with the industry is certainly going to help you out. That being said, here is what I also say to people. Don't necessarily look at your own background and the specific industries you worked in as the limiting factor. What you want to do is sit down and create a list of your characteristics, attributes, and skills in what you've done in business. So, for example, if you have experience working in a business with a lot of, say, teenaged employees, like after school employees, like young minimum wage staff, well, that kind of experience is going to allow you to be able to own and manage a lot of different kinds of businesses who happen to share that sort of workforce, right? If it's something that can be easily learned. So a car wash, for example, is a pretty simple business. You've got some marketing, people come in, the machinery and stuff may be complex. And so, you really need to find out what is happening with the owner of that business. So I'll give you an example. You could buy a business. I've seen this many times where the owner of the business was a handy person and there were trucks and other vehicles in the business, and the owner was doing his own repairs. And then the buyer comes and looks at that business, and the buyer isn't qualified to do repairs on vehicles, right? So when you look at that business, what you have to then try to do is figure out what would the normal budget be for the proper maintenance of these vehicles to have it done by an auto repair shop, right? And then you have to make that adjustment in how you look at the business because the seller is injecting certain specific skills or abilities into that business to make it run better than what you're going to be able to do. And so you need to make that adjustment so that you know, hey, I'm not going to have the same degree of profit because I'm going to be paying the auto shop to take care of this vehicle. And so a simpler kind of business, like the kinds of businesses that end up being franchises are what I will often point to. So, your fast food restaurant, your carpet cleaning business, like all these kinds of things. If it's easy enough for a franchisor to teach someone how to run this business with like a week of training, then you are probably going to be able to learn how to run this business by spending a couple of weeks with the seller in a transition period, right? So don't be too afraid of those businesses. If the business is far more technical, demanding, etc., and the seller is a person who has a lot of skill and ability in that particular field, then you really have to be careful. How are you going to cover the skills gap? And we can find these skills gaps in a lot of places people don't expect. So I'll tell you a quick story. I once, when I was a business broker, had a artisanal French bakery for sale. Now, the difference, if anyone's ever baked bread, the difference between baking bread and baking cookies is that when you bake cookies, you pretty much follow the recipe on the side of the cookie, the chocolate chip bag.
Read the back of the
and
box.
you're going to end up with something that's probably going to be okay, right? And so baking cookies is very much about following a formula and a process. Baking bread is entirely different because the humidity, the temperature, all of these different factors are going to play a role in how the dough rises, how long it needs to sit in the proofer, how long it's going to then have to bake for. And Virginia, do you know how you get someone who's qualified to be a French baker? I learned this during this exercise. So it turns out that what you have to do is you go to France and you take a 12-year-old and you put them in a French bakery. And 10 years later, they're qualified as a French baker.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So because that was the person who was trying to sell. Is they had spent their entire youth, adolescence working in a French bakery in France, and then they immigrated over here, and then they opened their own place, and they were trying to sell it because they needed to move to someplace else. And this was the sticking point that every buyer eventually came across was, if I buy this business and I'm not a French baker, then how do I ensure that I'm going to be able to deliver this product to the quality that the customers expect? Now, everyone's going to say, well, you hire someone. Well, here's the difficulty with that. Remember the bench strength problem? Is that if you hire one person, that person now has ultimate leverage over you and they'll know that they are the key linchpin in the whole business, right? And if something ever happens to them, you cannot necessarily step in and take over, which means the business is in a very precarious position. It would need to grow to the point where you could have two such characters, like specialists that are working in the business, to really have some degree of redundancy. And that's the kind of difficulty that often leads to a small business never changing hands. And in fact, that bakery never did. Eventually, the baker closed the bakery. He owned the building, and he ended up selling the building to someone else who opened a different kind of business in there.
Very interesting. Well, and I think that leads us naturally into how do we as business owners start to think about setting up our business like for an exit. If that hasn't crossed someone's mind yet, this might be kind of like a slap in the face conversation, like, oh crap, I'm doing everything wrong. I'm doing everything myself. This is never going to be sellable. But earlier we talked about getting people in positions to where you're kind of like working yourself out of the business. So I love that. And then we talked about we touched on creating written processes and procedures so that everything's documented. What are some other things that a business owner should be looking at for an eventual exit?
Well, there's a lot of people out there who will say when you start a business or get into business, you should have the exit in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily in that camp. And here's why. If you start a business, chances are the earnings will be low at first. You race towards that break even point and you try to build the business up. You should go and figure out what other people who are running the same kind of business who are employees are paid. Here's why. If, for example, you own a business where you should be earning a salary of, say, $100,000 a year, and other employee, let's say there's a big national company that you compete with and you're a small local store, but they've got a location somewhere and they're paying their managers $100,000 a year. You need to get your business operating to the point where you're taking out $100,000 a year so that you're actually paying yourself what your time is worth. So when you reach that point, in my vernacular that I use with amongst my clients, I will then say that you graduated from owning a hobby to owning a job. Because if you're doing this work for 80 grand,
Uh-huh.
it means that part of your time is being donated to keep this thing going. And it's because you're not even able to pay yourself what your time is worth according to what the market has dictated.
Right.
So if you're below that line, you own a hobby. When you get to that point, you own a job. Then you got to push forward beyond. So if you're paying yourself $100,000 and now there's an extra $40,000, $50,000 a year in profit beyond that, now you've got what is likely a sellable small business. And someone is going to be interested in this because they can buy the business, they can borrow some money to do the deal. They can take a $100,000 salary for their time that they're going to work in it. And there's extra money to service the debt that they're going to take on. And so for somebody who's looking towards, hey, I want to sell my business one day, very first thing, get the earnings fixed. Like start making money. You know probably what you need to do. You either need more customers or you need to change your pricing or you need to address your costs, whatever it is, get it firing on all cylinders and start making some more money. Once you're in that position, then the next thing is, how on earth am I going to show someone who shows up here to buy this business that they can do all the things I'm doing? And so if you have a business and you're doing sales and you're helping customers, you already have a system in place. It's just that those systems may be in your head, right? And so you've got to get them from your head down onto paper
Right.
so that you can show someone else, this is how we do things. This is the process we follow. These are the step-by-step of this product or this service. So in my own business, I mentioned earlier that we do the business evaluations, we do the packaging, creating the business profiles, we do the advertising campaigns, and we do the coaching. So we have a framework of steps for each one of those things. And that's how I've been able to train team members to help me with this.
Yeah.
Is they can follow those steps too. Now, there's a lot of technical stuff that has to rub off, and it isn't entirely possible to document everything. It's like if you had an auto repair shop, in your flow chart, you might say that we're going to meet the customer at the front, we're going to figure out what's wrong, we're going to create a work order, it's going to go to the back, and the mechanic will fix the car. You're not going to document every different kind of repair job that a mechanic's going to do. Just their trade is going to be such that they know how to fix these different things or look up online, like they've got their own resources, et cetera, the mechanics will use to look at certain specific problems and figure out how to fix it. So you're going to let them do that thing. But that whole workflow of this is, how we greet the customer. This is how we input it into the computer. This is how we price the job. This is how, when the mechanic says we need these 3 parts, this is how we order the parts. This is how we reconcile our customer's bill with the invoice we're going to get from the parts store next week, right? So that we can actually know that we're being invoiced for things that we actually bought, needed, and were delivered, instead of just getting an invoice and hoping that it's correct, right? Because people make mistakes. So all of those processes, how you match things together, how you make sure things happen, is there a job in your business where someone reconciles that? For example, the invoice. In that person's role, what are they doing? Like you might do it today by looking at the invoice and looking at, customer files and things like that. But what is it that you're doing and what are you looking for? And so documenting all of that and having it written out so that you can show someone is incredibly valuable. There's a fun story that I'd like to share about a restaurant. So this was a very successful breakfast and lunch restaurant, and I had it up for sale. And the seller had, decades in the restaurant experience. He knew how to operate a restaurant really well. And the buyer had none. So this is an example of one of those businesses where you're like, how hard could it be? Right. And
Well,
so the buyer says to the seller, I've never run a restaurant before. I'm really going to be depending upon the staff you have in place to operate this with me. How do I know that they're going to stick around for the long term? And the seller looked at him and said, well, it's a restaurant, so I can actually guarantee you that almost all of them will be gone within a year.
yeah. Yeah, you have to know
Because,
what the beast is that you're walking into, the turnover.
right.
Yeah.
And he said, turnover is a big part of this industry. And then he said, that's why I've spent so much time figuring out the best way to hire people.
Ah,
And what I'm going to be showing you is a series of ads that I use online that help bring forward the best candidates. And I've got a process for making sure they're serious. So,
genius.
when they respond to the ads, my process is that I reply back to them on email or whatever the platform is with a phone number.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask them to call me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said only half of them will,
Ah,
which is great because the half that do want the job, right?
right.
And then on that phone call, he'll set an appointment for them to come in. And then they'll come in. Some of them show up, some of them don't. Again, you're filtering for seriousness and commitment and motivation. When they come in, if I've got this checklist that I'm going through that I will teach to you, and I'm going to show you how I do the hiring. And then if I hire them, I've got these packages put together where it has all about our principles, our mission, our goal, how we do things, what the different steps are. If it's a waiter, for example, it's going to say, this is how we greet people, this is how we take the orders, this is how we input it into the point of sale system, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give that documentation, that package to them at that time, and they can look through that stuff so that when they show up on their first day of work, they're not entirely green. Like they've got a little bit of knowledge and understanding of what they're getting themselves into and what the workflow is going to be like. And these reference tables that we have here in the package, these are posted behind the counter where customers can't see them, so that when that new waiter is going back with the order and they're putting it in the POS system and they can't remember exactly what to do, they can refer to it, right? So what the restaurant owner did is he showed how systems and processes can address the problem of, hey, I'm afraid that people might quit. And the systems and processes address all of the problems in a small
Mm-hmm.
business. And so, number one, get the cash flow right. Number two, figure out how am I going to show somebody else that they can do what I do in running this business. And then you might even have to experiment with it a little bit. I've got a good friend named Mike who successfully sold his business, but part of the process, and this was a office-based business where all the employees came together every day. Part of the process was he documented the processes and systems that he would implement, and then he rented himself an office at a co-working space on the other side of the city. And for a year, he went to work there, not at the office.
Huh.
And it was because he was a diagnosed chronic micromanager, step in and do it for people kind of guy.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so every time someone came to him with a question that they would have to do something new or different, he would say, oh, let me do it, or I'll show you how. And he kept stepping into people's roles, and
Mm-hmm.
he prevented them from growing and gaining experience and learning how to do things on their own.
Yeah.
And so because he could not change his personality, he changed his location
That's
so that
amazing.
he was not available to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And he said it worked like magic.
Yeah.
And, then when he spoke with a buyer and said, I've been actually sitting at a desk over here away from everybody else
Mm-hmm.
and for the past year, and these are the things that I'm doing here, he gave people a great deal of confidence
Yeah.
that they would be able to step into his role and do what he was doing as the new owners.
Yeah. Well, and even while he's still in that role, I'm sure that things became apparent that needed a process or that needed a
Yeah.
solution because I'm not there. Right. And so you can get those things in place and then wait and see, does anything else need fixing? But through that year, I'm sure he was able to really, truly establish this machine that runs by itself that you could hand off. So that's a great story. I can't tell you how many managers I had in my past corporate life that I wish would have gone and worked somewhere else.
Well, it's really interesting, how people evolve, their habits and the way that they are. It's funny during that whole lockdown period in 2020, everybody had to kind of learn a little bit like how to work more remotely. Before that, when I was working for the bank, and even before that in my sales career in advertising, I was always like a field rep. So I was always working from a home office, talking with my manager on the phone, or sharing documents over email and that kind of thing. And so I had kind of evolved with this sort of isolated remote communication kind of thing, for my whole career. And so I know for a lot of people, jumping onto Zoom and all that kind of thing was something new and different. For me, I had always been doing it. And so I've seen how people have made it work for a long time. And there's always been people who have had to make things work over distance, and it's always through processes, procedures, and systems. This is how we do it to make sure that all the boxes are checked and all the things are done, so that we deliver for the customer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good review of what we should be doing, thinking about if we want to buy a business, maybe it complements the current business that you're running, or maybe it's totally different. Maybe we want to set up our business so that we can confidently exit one day. And then even just the way your work has evolved over time, your content creation process, all of these things. Do you want to give us a little peek as to what's coming up for you in 2025? Maybe some ideas for your channel, or if you have another book in your back pocket, or what's coming up for you?
What's interesting is actually just last week I released two new ones.
Wow.
And so,
okay, hold on. How are you writing these so fast?
So here's the thing: is this one 21 stupid things people do when trying to buy a business? This is one that I wrote in 2016.
Oh.
So I initially wrote it as what they call a lead magnet, right? As something I could give away to attract people to come in and learn and start working with me. And then I put it on Amazon as a Kindle ebook as well, and people started to buy it. And I eventually even made it into an audiobook. And what I did over the course of the summer is I asked my email list. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna update this old book. Can you give me any ideas of things I missed amongst the 21 stupid things?" And I got a bunch of emails back from people, and they brought up different suggestions. And so literally I rewrote the book just by adding new sections. I did some editing of the original content, but I added some new things based on customer feedback. And then I looked at some of the interviews I've done with people who've bought businesses where there have been problems. And I used those to create case studies, which I added to the book as well. And so it was really just a readaptation. And I found an artist on Upwork to do a new cover for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a few hours of work, but it's not a monumental task like people will think.
Yeah.
The other one is a glossary. And so I wrote out a list of 100 small business terms that come up in the deal making M&A space.
Okay.
And again, I sent it out to my email list, and I said, I'm thinking of writing a glossary to put at the back of some of my books and other places. Take a look at this list, and what did I forget? Well, let me tell you, Virginia, I got 170 other new terms back from people.
What?
So I had this list of over 200, and I just created a document on my computer, and I just promised myself every day I'll write a definition with an example for just a couple of them. And I eventually came to finish it just a few weeks ago. So I was able to release that in time for Christmas too.
Oh my
So
gosh.
again, like people think writing a book is this big monumental task.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be. And, it can be very specific. So like I was speaking with a real estate agent the other day, and they were talking about how they would like to get into selling more investment properties. And I was like, well, why don't you write the book on it? Seriously, like how to invest in rental buildings, for example, in Baltimore, because this is where this guy was in Baltimore. I'm like, you could literally write that book for people in Baltimore about Baltimore. You could get into neighborhood specific information. You could get in, you could get as deep as you want. And then you could be the real estate agent that wrote the book on investment properties in Baltimore. Right.
You
And not
create
that,
a niche for yourself. How cool is
well, yeah,
that?
it's not that you're going to make a ton of money off selling books on Amazon.
No.
I sell a couple dozen books every month. Like I get, like maybe get in some,
$100. Yay.
I might get into the three figures of royalties, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah, like $100 or something. But what it does is allows me to differentiate myself and show people like the depth and breadth of my knowledge, and it gives credibility in a whole bunch of different ways. And having my YouTube channel, for example, like I haven't done this yet, but there are other people out there who've created YouTube channels or podcasts where they've had lots of interviews, and then they've used the content they've created online to then create something like a book. Like a lot of the time, this content can be recycled. One of the things we do now, my assistant and I, is she'll go and take a video from 5 or 6 years ago that gets very few views, and she'll use that to create like a case study and blog post, and she'll put it up on our blog on Saturdays. And what it does is it creates what to most people appears to be fresh content, but it's really not. And she always links the video, which many of the people will click through and watch the video, which then reignites the YouTube algorithm saying, hey, there's a bunch of interest in this video again. And so now the algorithm is more open to maybe sharing that video to people when they're searching on certain topics. So it's once you get, it's like a tree. Having a podcast, there's only two times to do it: 10 years ago or today. Just because it becomes an asset to your business that will produce dividends going forward. And if I was going to buy a business and one of them had no kind of content creation online strategy at all, and the other one was the top channel for swimming pool maintenance and repair in I don't know, Minneapolis. Obviously, anyone in Minneapolis who's searching for anything to do with their pool is going to come up with this content online. I mean, that's the business I would want to buy.
I love that. So, okay, the two books, you showed them to us real quickly, but tell us the titles just for people that are only listening. And then tell me where we should follow you, find you, all the things.
Yeah, sure. So the my book that came out in September is called Buying versus Starting a Small Business: A Guide to Keep You from Going Broke. And it's really for people that are new to the whole entrepreneurship idea, that just want to get into business for the first time. And the rewritten book is called 21 Stupid Things People Do When Trying to Buy a Business. Learn how to avoid these awful novice mistakes.
Yes.
And all my books are available on Amazon, of course. But as far as finding me online, the place to go is davidcbarnett.com. That's my blog, and you'll find links there to all the social media. Or if you just type David Barnett Small Business into YouTube or any of the podcasting platforms, you will find me right away. I've been publishing now for over a decade, and there's hundreds of videos and audio files up there. If anyone out there is just simply interested in this whole idea of buying, selling, or operating and managing, improving your small business, come and join the audience. Like it's free, and I share all kinds of great content, and I know that many of you will find it valuable.
Yeah. There's a lot to learn from you. Thank you so much for sharing your business journey, sharing what you do, educating us just a little bit on some of the things that you've seen. And I just really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Virginia. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree.